Well, this video should come as absolutely no shock to anyone, honestly, unless you've been living under a political rock and know absolutely nothing about UK politics, the Tory party, and just the NHS in general, really. Um, Here we are. Um, this news, which we'll get to in the moment, really doesn't surprise me. But what really shocks me is that we've continuously on this channel covered many of the times that these Tory ministers, actual cabinet officials, have said stuff about privatising the NHS, getting rid of our workers' rights, getting completely rid of regulations, and basically, you know, doing everything that would essentially make this country into a complete and absolute oligarchy. But there you go. And here's the thing: after Brexit, we know what their plans are. They want to turn the UK into a Singapore on the Thames. That's their objective. And we know this because several Tories who got elected back during, I think it was during like the coalition era, when they got elected, they all grouped together and wrote a book called Britannia Unchained, in which they basically said, hey, look, we want to get rid of all regulations completely in this country. We want to get rid of workers' rights and employee protections in this country completely, because UK workers, and this is in the book, it's the one of the opening preference in the book, that the UK workers are among the laziest workers in the entire world. They want to completely get rid of minimum wage rules. It's all there in the book, and this is what really worries me: is after Brexit, they've got their plan. It's right there in the open. They want to do it, and now, of course, should we say, other books, or in this case, it's a pamphlet, has come to light, written by exactly the same people. And of course, Dominic Raab, the guy who's in charge of the health department at the moment, Department of Health. What has he said? Well, Dominic Raab denies calling for NHS privatisation despite being confronted by his actual words. So Dominic Raab has not had a good morning. You know how it is when you try and deny you ever said that thing you said in writing, even when it has your name on it. Speaking on the Today programme on BBC Radio 4 on Tuesday morning, Nick Robinson questioned Raab about whether the Tories plan to privatise the NHS, to which he responded, I can tell you categorically, I've never advocated for privatising of the NHS. An odd response, given that he co-authored a pamphlet which literally called for more private providers in the NHS. And we're also doing this on the exact same morning that the Torygraph, or Telegraph, this morning, has literally come out and said that this whole COVID problem in the UK, not to do with policies, not to do with the Tories and their policies of austerity of defunding the NHS, but it's the NHS's fault because it's not as good as a private medical insurance system. You've only got to look at the US and the absolute situation their system is in to see how well that system is. And bear in mind, you roll back the clock to 2009, where Labour are in power, and I can't remember his name now. I can see his face, white hair, glasses, but he was Department of Health, and he stood up in Parliament and he said, good news, the World Health Organization, like the top level of the people who pretty much put the gold standard, like this is the standard you should be aiming for in like public health, all that stuff, came out and said the UK and France, if an influenza pandemic happened, here we are now in an influenza pandemic, has openly said back then in 2009 that we were the most prepared countries for such a pandemic. Now, I don't know what's going on in France at the moment, but I suspect they're doing a damn sight better than us, potentially. But what happened? What happened between 2009 and now to cause us to be in such an unprepared position? Well, I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's the Tories and their programme of austerity and the fact that they just really hate the NHS. And they tend to hate any programme that is socialist in nature that succeeds. And they've done this countless times before. Get into power, defund it to an extent which it collapses to, and then just go, well, we tried, and just privatise it fully. That is their track record. We also are having reports at the moment that because of the Tories ramped up privatisation in the NHS, getting rid of rules in contracts which allow the NHS to be in charge and to dictate what's going on. This is why Richard Branson sued the NHS, because he entered into a contract with them. He realised he wasn't making as much money as he could be, so he tried to get out of it. The NHS said, no, you've got a contract with us. He then tried to sue them. He didn't try, he sued them. Nevertheless, we are now in a situation where if a private provider is not living up to the standards that they promised in a contract, the NHS can't cut them or terminate them or force them to up their standards. The NHS now has to pay out the remainder of that contract to that private provider. And that's a rule that the Tories brought in. Not only that, we have interesting situations just like that where private providers are shutting down and going onto furlough, thus leaving massive gaps in public health provisions. We are in an absolute crisis, and yet this still continues and goes on. And here we have an open letter of admission. This is what the Tories want to do. They want to completely get rid of the NHS. So I guarantee you, after this whole crisis is over, there will be... This is why we need to push for a full, independent public inquiry across the board of what went on in this crisis. Not just one that solely focuses just on the NHS. And while I think there should be one that just focuses on the NHS, and again, it should be a public inquiry, because this is how we find where things went wrong, how it can improve, where we did well. If we allow just that to happen, then the Tories will take it over. They will stack the committee in their favour with people like, Dominic Raab here. And they will try and use it to justify to push for more privatisation or just push to fully privatise the NHS. So anyway, it continues. So he tried to pass it off as no big deal. Just something relating to the florists and coffee shops. Is anyone seriously suggesting that the nurses, the doctors, the civil servants in the Department of Health should be running those services? Yet Raab, lefties literally want to make doctors and nurses work in Costa Coffee in local hospitals because why not? No, that's not what we're calling for. Leaving aside that completely absurd claim, Robinson went on to confront him about his outburst. The pamphlet talked about hospitals being run by private companies, not florists or coffee shops. It said hospitals, and your name was on it. At that point, he just flat out denied the reality, saying that it certainly wasn't anything that he wrote. Thankfully, Twitter dug up his pamphlet and brought it out for everyone to see. And of course, who was on this? So the book was co-authored with Kurti, I always butcher his name, Kasai Katrang, Chris Skidmore, Priti Patel, Liz Truss, and he's called After the Coalition. And it was an attempt to define conservative values for a time when the party wouldn't be held back by the Lib Dems. And well, here we are. You know, this is something that we absolutely have to fight. You know, we have to fight it every way in which we possibly can. And I do think there is a really just cause to get a petition going. Again, writing a good petition is not my speciality, but you could write a good petition now to basically go to completely call for the complete on privatisation of the NHS. You know, bring it all back into, you know, government control and under the Department of Health. I think it's well worth it. So yeah.